Okay, wonderful. I'm going to turn my camera off so all attention's on you. And families, if you have questions, if you could please use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen. I will be trying to, see patterns of questions, and at the end, hopefully we'll have a little time to ask any lingering questions out there. So thank you. And I'll rename you after I'm off the screen here.
No worries. And then if it's something urgent, feel free to interrupt us with any questions that you feel might be urgent or whatever. So
I can do that. Sounds good. Thank you.
Don't mind. So.
All right. Thanks so much again for the introduction. I'm Caren Naidoff.
And I'm Alan Press, and Caren and I are both partners at Shire Law Group in Lincolnshire, Illinois. We're an estate planning firm, and we've done this presentation now for a couple of years, and we feel that people find it very informative and something that we think that you're going to enjoy. So we look forward to presenting to you what you must know when your child turns 18.
So we will be taking questions during the course of the presentation. We'll stay on if you have any questions following the presentation, or if you have questions later on that you think about and you want to give us a call, please feel free. We want to make sure that you understand all the material that we're discussing this evening. You can call us at 847-955-9000 or send us an email, Caren with a C, C-A-R-E-N at shirelawgroup.com, or Alan, A-L-A-N, at shirelawgroup.com. And with that, we will get started. So we know that we are here to learn about what you need to know when your child turns 18. So some of you this evening are joining us and you have children that are juniors, and some of you are joining us who have children that are seniors. For those senior families, congratulations. Your children are going to be graduating. Some of your children are going to be traveling near or far. Some of them are going to be heading to college. Some of them are going to be starting a new job. And some of them are going to be moving, maybe for the first time, into an apartment or into a dorm. And most likely, it's a combination of a few of these things. But no matter what direction our children are heading in, there's one thing that we all share in common when our children turn 18, and that is that once they turn 18, they are considered legal adults. And with that designation comes some important changes for them, for you, and for your family as a whole. And we're going to talk about those changes, what that means for your family and for them this evening. This chart designates some of those changes that happen when your children become legal adults at the age of 18. Before 18, you could access your child's medical records. So if, for example, you had a question about your child's vaccination history, you could call up to their child's doctor and get information about that vaccination history from the doctor, from the nurse. And after 18, that right becomes limited. Before 18, you could make decisions about the course of your child's medical treatment. So if your child got injured playing a sport or tripped and fell, you could accompany your child to the doctor and decide on treatments on your child's behalf. After 18, that right becomes limited. Before 18, you could speak to your child's doctor. So if your child wasn't feeling well, you could call up to the doctor's office, you could discuss your child's symptoms, and you could come up with a course of treatment for your child on your child's behalf. And after 18, that right becomes limited. Before 18, you could help your child with finances. So if your child had a bank account and they had a statement that they didn't understand, you could, on your child's behalf, go ahead and call up that bank to try to sort things out for them. And after 18, that right becomes limited. Before 18, you could access your child's educational records. And after 18, that right also becomes limited in some instances. So what is a parent to do? That's what we're going to focus on this evening. We're going to talk about healthcare and financial powers. We're going to talk about 3 essential documents. We're also going to talk about FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which governs your access to educational records once your child becomes a legal adult at the age of 18. And when we've done this in the past, this presentation, we've had questions from the community that have come up, and we wanted to proactively bring those to you this evening. So Alan's going to talk about wills and trusts and access to digital assets. And then I'll talk a bit about dorm, apartment, and global insurance and health and safety apps. We're going to start out with those healthcare and financial powers, those 3 essential documents regarding healthcare and financial access. Those 3 documents are a healthcare power of attorney, a HIPAA authorization, and a power of attorney for property. And we're going to take each one of these documents one at a time so we can explore each one individually. A parent cannot make medical decisions on behalf of their adult child, even in an emergency, unless proper authorization has been put in place. That proper authorization is known as a healthcare power of attorney. The healthcare power of attorney gives parents or a designated individual authority to make medical decisions on an adult child's behalf. So the first question we always get from our young adults who come in to do these documents is, am I giving up any of my rights by signing these documents? And the answer is no. This authorization becomes important in the event that the adult child, in the case of a healthcare power of attorney, is unable to make his or her own medical decisions. So what would happen if you didn't have the healthcare power of attorney in place? Well, you would potentially have to go to court to get a guardianship, to have the ability to make medical decisions on your adult child's behalf in the midst of a crisis. It's expensive and it's aggravating. So putting these documents in place are relatively easy. It becomes extremely important if your child cannot make their own health care decisions, that they have authorized you to step in to make those decisions on their behalf. So my friend had a daughter who was going to a large university. She had never been away from home before for that extended period of time, and she was going fairly far. And my friend wanted to help her get acclimated to the school and thought one way of doing this would be to encourage her to join a recreational sports team. She happened to love soccer, and she decided to join the soccer team. And this was a great decision because she was meeting friends and she was having a good time, until one day in practice, she collided with one of her teammates. And the collision was a bad one. She hurt herself and she ended up at the University Health Services. She was in a lot of pain. She's away from home for the first time. She's with doctors that she does not know, and she doesn't understand or can't appreciate anything that's being said to her and cannot make her own medical decisions. Fortunately, my friend had a power of attorney for healthcare in place for her that she was able to send out directly to the doctors and make medical decisions immediately on her child's behalf. So when we do these documents for our clients, we always have them in electronic copies as well. And we would highly recommend electronic copies for any of these documents you put in place. Electronic copies are just fine. You don't need originals or copies of an original. Electronic copy is just as valid. And in the middle of a crisis, you're going to want to get these documents immediately and as quickly as possible to whomever they need to go to. So I have them front and center on my computer, on my laptop, and it's important to keep these documents someplace where you can access them very quickly if they are needed. The next document that we're going to discuss are HIPAA authorizations. And you probably have all heard of HIPAA authorizations before. You've probably all signed them at your own doctor's office. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And a HIPAA authorization allows healthcare providers to release and share medical information with designated people who are on their authorization. The HIPAA allows doctors to speak about a student or an adult child's medical condition with whomever is designated by that adult child on their HIPAA authorization. So this becomes crucial. If your child is admitted to a medical facility, they've never been there before, there's no paperwork, they're not able to verbally say that it's okay to reach out to you or members of your family, the HIPAA authorization would be extremely important, that you would be able to send that directly in to get information about your child's condition. especially if they're not able to speak with you directly about their condition, or maybe they can't fully relay medical information to you. Again, at a time of crisis, your primary concern is to ensure your child is taken care of. You don't want the potential additional burden of court proceedings and associated legal costs. You're going to want to be able to get information about your child as quickly as possible. And I have a personal example, and all the examples from this evening's presentation will come from my family and not Alan's family, but they are true. My son had attended school out of state, and he was not feeling well. And although my husband and I encouraged him to go and seek medical advice, he always had a reason why he couldn't. There wasn't a slot at University Health Services that was open, that was convenient. He had to go to a study group, he had to go to class. And throughout the week, he got worse and worse. And finally, it got to a point where he had called me. It was in the middle of the night, and he was going to the emergency room. He didn't want me to worry that he was with a friend who was going to drive him and keep me posted on what was going on with him. He had brought his phone, but his phone was on one battery bar left, and he didn't bring a charger. But don't worry, because his friend had everything under control. So I waited and waited, and finally I got a text from his friend that said, I have no idea what's going on. They won't give me any information because I'm not authorized to receive any of that information. So I quickly called up to the nurse's station and I said, my son was admitted. What is happening? And they said, we can't even tell you if he was admitted or not without the proper documentation. Fortunately, I had these documents in place. I had them electronically. I could send them quickly to that hospital. I called back the hospital, and the nurse said, thank you for sending them. Now we can tell you what's going on. We're sorry, without that proper documentation, we couldn't have released any information to you. So fortunately, I had this HIPAA in place. I can tell you personally, when you get that phone call, you want to be able to find out information immediately. You don't want to have that extra burden of potentially having to go to court to have the ability to seek out that information about what's happening with your child.
The next item that we're going to talk about is the power of attorney for property. So Caren discussed the power of attorney for healthcare, which is a document that appoints a decision maker to make medical decisions for somebody who can't make them for themselves. And then she also discussed the HIPAA form, which is authorization to obtain information. We're now going to look at a power of attorney for property. Think of property in the broadest sense of the word. So really anything financial, not just real estate or what we might consider to be property, but anything. So anything financial, including real estate, would be included in this power of attorney. So this allows a parent to manage their adult child's finances. It becomes very critical if a child is injured or otherwise unable to make their own financial decisions. So like the power of attorney for healthcare, you're designating an individual to make financial decisions for you if you're unable to make them yourself. And this is something too, I think Caren mentioned in the beginning of the program, that anything that a person is signing, like these powers of attorney, just because somebody has power of attorney over you doesn't mean that you're waiving your rights in any way. So a power of attorney can't be used to override somebody's own decision-making. It's really very useful when they're either unavailable or unable to make their own financial decisions. It can cover things like bank accounts, investment accounts, real estate, dealing with the IRS. We're going to see some examples on the next slide. And did we have a question that we can go into?
Yeah, I think this is a quick one for you, but a good time. We have someone who wants to know if both parents are able to be named as the healthcare or property power of attorney, or if it's just one person who can be designated.
And that's a great question. So with these forms, they are the Illinois statutory power of attorney forms for healthcare and for property. You may name both parents, but only one may act at a time. So typically what you would do is you designate one parent, let's say, as the first choice to be a decision maker, and then you'd have the second parent as a backup. Now, nothing would prevent, of course, the parents from working together, and you hope that that would be the case. But if something needed to be signed or a decision needed to be made, the person who's accepting the power of attorney is going to look to the person that's named first. If they're available, then that's who they would go to. If they're not available, then they would go to the backup. You cannot have co-agents in Illinois on these powers of attorney. So you have to have one at a time. And the reason behind that is that the legislature, I believe, feels that if you have co-agents and they can't agree on what to do, then you're rendering the power of attorney useless because nobody can make a decision. So they're forcing one decision maker over the other. In these situations, I think what we see is that maybe on the financial, the adult child would name one parent and then have the other parent as the backup. And then on the healthcare document, I might flip that around. Really, anything can be done that the adult child would like to do, but you can't name co-agents. But again, nothing would prevent parents from working together. It's just that if somebody needed to be the decision maker, it's going to be that person who's named first. And remember, if this form is not in place and a financial decision needed to be made, the only recourse that you have as a parent, if your child is an adult, is to petition the court to become their legal guardian. It's very time consuming, it's expensive because it involves lawyers going to court, and it's also public, right? So putting together powers of attorney is a much less expensive and private way to handle all of this. You hope that you never need any of these forms, I think, right? So I think we can all say that. But if you do need them, the fact that they're there, they're ready to go, is really a great benefit to everybody. Yes.
Okay, a couple follow-up questions. One is, are the power of attorneys developed for the state where the student lives or where the student will be attending college?
And we are going to get to that. We just have a couple slides. We're a couple slides away, so we'll get there soon. So I'm going to hold off on that one. Okay,
and then the second question was just whether, okay, nope, it's the same question. I just misread it the first time. So I'll let you continue and we'll wait till the end. Thank you.
Well, it'll come up before the end, but it's going to come up in a few slides. So
okay.
We're almost there. So a couple of examples of what a power of attorney for property could be used for, you know, dealing with a letter from the IRS or dealing with bank accounts or doing something at the Department of Motor Vehicles. So when we do these powers of attorney, we typically recommend that the young adult make them effective immediately because, of course, they trust you as their parents to do what is in their best interest. In fact, that's a legal duty. It's a fiduciary duty that you have to the principal as an agent to do the best thing for them. So we typically recommend that they make it effective immediately. By doing that, there's also a benefit that it could also be used for convenience. So let's say a child is not incapacitated, but they're just spending their junior year abroad in, you know, in another country, and they're not incapacitated, they're just not available. By making the form effective immediately, it can easily be used even in that circumstance to handle things for your adult child to make sure that everything is getting taken care of. Another thing that we like to, I did mention that the powers of attorney, the healthcare power of attorney and the property power of attorney are Illinois statutory forms. We're going to get into in a minute as to whether or not they work out of state and what you should do in that situation. But as statutory forms, they're not necessarily as complete as we would like them to be. So we always add additional powers to the statutory form to make it more powerful. And one of those areas is the area of digital assets. The statutory forms are silent on this issue, so we always add an additional power, granting the agent the ability to access things online. And of course, we always say, is it easier for you as a parent to access, you know, an account online if you know the login and password? And of course, the answer is going to be yes. So you may want to consider as a family, you know, when your child goes off to their first job or goes off to school, that you have a password emergency system or something like that. If that were to fail, however, or you didn't have one, then of course, having that in the power of attorney may be helpful, so you're able to gain access to any online accounts or digital assets. And then here we get to that question of the different states. So let's say your child is, you live in Libertyville or you live in Vernon Hills, and your child is going to go to the University of Texas or the University of Arizona, or they're going to go to the University of Connecticut or something. So they're going to a school that's not in the state of Illinois. Does it make sense to get these documents done here then, or should they just wait till they go to the other state? Well, a couple of reasons would state that it's probably better to do it here before they leave. Number one being that when they get to college, they're probably going to be pretty busy and trying to acclimate. So it's just one other thing that they have to get done. So getting it completed beforehand is a great idea. And the good news is that as long as the documents are executed properly with proper witnessing and notary, as long as they're executed properly here in the state of Illinois, they're going to be valid and usable in all 50 states. So for that reason alone, we think it's a great idea to do the documents beforehand. The documents, people always ask too, is there an expiration date for these documents? There is not. However, they do get stale. So maybe a 20 or 30-year-old power of attorney might raise some eyebrows or some questions as to whether or not it's still valid. But the point being that these powers of attorney are going to be good for your child, your adult child, while they're at school, even after they graduate. A normal time for them to do a new one is going to be when they have a major life change, significant other, they get married and they want to add additional people or take their parents off the form and put on somebody else. So that's a normal time to do it. So we are proponents of getting it done beforehand. Your child does need to be 18, however. So we do get that question a lot. If your child is not quite 18, they don't have the ability to sign legal documents. So we do have a lot of clients, Caren, that come in on their 18th birthday. We can think of better ways to spend your 18th birthday, but we try to make it as enjoyable as possible. So that's always a possibility if you're nervous about that. So
what do these documents do? They obviously provide peace of mind. Hopefully you don't need to use them, but if you do, it's very important you have them in place because they allow you to make immediate decisions and give you access to critical information if a crisis should occur. And it allows you to just focus on that situation. The documents are easy to put in place and they should be among the top of everyone's list once your children turn 18. Copies of the documents should be kept in a safe and easily accessible place. Your child doesn't need to take these with them to college. You can keep them at your home, but they should have electronic copies and you will have electronic copies as well if they're needed.
And then there's just a couple of quick questions here I'll just address. Number one, where do we find the form? So we did mention that the power of attorney forms for healthcare and for property are the Illinois statutory short form powers of attorney. They are, you can just Google that and they're gonna pop up, or a version of that will pop up. Yes, documents do need to be witnessed and notarized. And then the third question is gonna be something that we'll talk about a little bit later. This is not meant to be an advertisement for our firm, rather just more information for you, but we do offer this service, of course, and we'll talk about that at the end. And there's a question about legal service plans. The price is so low though that we don't accept that for this. We're happy to give you a detailed invoice, and if you could submit that and get paid, then that's where you can, you certainly can do that. We'll give you whatever you need to try to get reimbursed if you can. So where to find the forms? I'm recommending that you Google that. You can grab them in various different locations and places. Illinois short form statutory short form power of attorney for property, or short form power of attorney for medical. You can find them there.
So FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And often parents are very upset when they learn that once their children turn 18, their rights to access their educational records are going to be potentially limited. And we'll talk about those limitations with the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which is known as FERPA. So before 18, you could view your child's educational records. And after 18, that right becomes limited without the proper authorization in place. Before 18, you could request a correction to your child's educational records. And after 18, that right becomes limited without the proper authorization in place. Before 18, you could decide who could see your child's educational records. And after 18, that right becomes limited without the proper authorization in place. Prior to 18, your child becoming a legal adult, you could get photocopies of your child's educational records. And after 18, that right becomes limited again without the proper authorization in place. So we have this common theme of proper authorization. What is proper authorization? It is a consent form. So FERPA has its own consent form. It is a written consent form where your child is giving the consent to the school that they're going to allow you to have access to their educational records when they think that that would be important. There's a lot of misconceptions around FERPA. A lot of times students just think it's about giving their parents access to their educational records in terms of their grades only. It's far more important than that. It's their entire educational record. So for example, if your child is having a hard time at school and they talk to a school administrator, and that school administrator has a concern about the conversation that they had, that administrator's hands are tied in order to be able to speak with you unless the FERPA consent form is in place. It is a very important form. The form should be filled out. You can get the FERPA forms online. We also provide FERPA forms in our office when we do these documents for our young adults. They should be given to the registrar's office. That is where they go to. So you should have on your list to make sure that there is a FERPA consent form that you give to the registrar's office after your child has signed off on it. Sometimes the schools themselves have their own FERPA forms, depending on the school. Sometimes your child just checks a box, not even realizing that they've checked off their FERPA consent form. Sometimes that consent form, the school puts additional things in there, like the child is giving the ability to have their image taken for marketing purposes or their phone number released. So sometimes the FERPA forms are more extensive and there's other things in there. So if the school does have its own FERPA forms, you want to read over it carefully and make sure that your child understands what they're signing before they sign that particular FERPA authorization form. So now we're going to talk about some common concerns that we discussed at the top of the presentation that we wanted to bring to you this evening. These are concerns that we have frequently gotten once we've done these presentations throughout the community, and people have questions about wills and trusts and access to digital assets, which Alan's going to discuss. And then I'm going to discuss dorm, apartment, and global insurance and health and safety apps.
So let's start off with wills and trusts for young adults. So we already talked about the powers of attorney and the healthcare directives. That's one essential element of estate planning. Wills and trusts are going to be another. So first, before we decide whether or not a young person or young adult is going to need a will or trust, let's just get a brief definition of those documents. A will is something that you might be familiar with. It's typically a document that says, I might create a will for myself, and it'll say something along the lines, when I pass away, I want my assets to go to my spouse if she survived me, otherwise in equal shares to my children. That might be a typical will that a married person might create. And then my wife would have a reciprocal will that would say maybe the same thing. You know, if she dies, everything would come to me unless I predeceased her, and then everything would go down in equal shares to the children. So it's a document that's effective only at the time of death. That is a contrast to powers of attorney, which are only effective during lifetime. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a differentiation between these documents. So powers of attorney terminate at death. A will begins at death. And it allows somebody to transfer their assets the way that they wish to transfer them. What is a trust in comparison? Well, a trust can do the same thing as a will. It can handle the disposition of property at death, but a trust actually becomes effective at the time of signing. So not only can it handle the disposition of property after somebody passes away, but it could also handle planning for potential incapacity or disability. So it does a really nice job. It spans both time periods. So it's a little bit like a super document. So something that can be used in advanced estate planning in order to make sure that you're getting things covered in the best way possible. So with those definitions, is it, does an adult child need either one of these documents? Some of it might depend on whether or not they have their own significant wealth. Of course, if they have their own money, they may want to consider doing a will or a trust to handle the disposition of that money if they were to pass away. However, there are some substitutes that you need to be aware of as well when making this decision. And certain things you can, your young adult can have an account that's payable on death, or POD, to a particular individual or individuals at the time of their death. That would pass outside of a will or a trust because the bank is going to make the funds in that account payable to the person that was designated on the POD. Also, assets may be held jointly with other individuals. You may have a joint bank account with your adult child. Well, during your lifetimes, the adult child in your lifetime, either one of you may be able to access the account and handle things in regard to that account. You don't need the power of attorney or a will to handle that, because if the adult child were to pass away and you're a joint owner on that account with them, you become the sole owner of that account upon the passing of the other joint tenant. And certain assets might have beneficiary designations like a life insurance policy or a retirement plan, right? Those also typically pass outside of a will or a trust because this is an agreement that you have with the life insurance company or the custodian of the retirement plan to pay particular beneficiaries or a beneficiary at the time of your death. So that's going to happen irregardless of what might be contained in somebody's will. So keeping that in mind, for many young adults that don't have their own wealth yet, typically it might be premature to worry about creating a will or a trust. Certainly a little bit later in life, if they have a significant other or they get married and they want to provide for their family with a will or a trust, that would be a really good idea at that point in time. But certainly for young people that have maybe inherited money, or maybe they had, investing in Bitcoin while they're in high school, I don't know, if they have their own money and it's significant, they may want to consider handling that as well. And then we want to just point out that this issue of digital assets is also important when you're putting together a will or a trust. So we talked about handling that in the power of attorney for property, not part of the statutory form. When we do these for our adult children clients, we add additional powers and we customize the form in order to make it a lot more useful than it might otherwise be. But even if you're drafting a will or a trust, you want to make sure that you're addressing this issue so that your executor under a will has the ability to access digital assets online even after death, or if you're creating a trust, that your successor trustee has the ability to access those types of things as well.
So we're going to talk a little bit about dorm, apartment, rental, and global insurance. So surprisingly, there are very inexpensive policies for dorm, apartment, rental, and global insurance. So it's one of those things that you should put on your list to look into, because things happen and it's worth looking into insuring yourself. Your homeowner's policy might also cover some of this. However, the deductible might be high on your homeowners, and it might be more economical to purchase a standalone policy. We don't endorse one policy over another, but we do recommend that you look into this when your children might be traveling with the global travel insurance, or if they're going off to college, to look into that dorm, apartment, or rental insurance. So this is where my second example comes in with my family. So my daughter,
all the examples are Karen's children, because mine were perfect. So.
It's true. They're all my examples, and they're true stories. So my daughter went to school in the middle of Pennsylvania, very, very cold there. And before she left for school, we told my daughter and my son, wherever you go, don't leave your computer alone, because things happen and you don't like to think about that, but their whole world is on their computer. All their assignments are on there, they're working on there, they're doing papers on there. So make sure that you just don't leave your computer someplace unattended if you're in public. So they knew that. And my daughter had a favorite place that she used to trudge to in the middle of winter to go study, her favorite spot in the library. And she went off one cold day, she bundled herself up, coat, her gloves, and her backpack with her computer, and she goes to her favorite spot. She gets herself situated, and she's hungry. And I don't know about all of you, but when I went to college, I didn't have, the ability to order Grubhub and get food delivered, but she did. So she had food delivered to the library. So she had to go downstairs to get her food. So she took her computer with her, as we had heeded that warning, and she went down, got her food, came back up, and her coat was missing from her spot. So she was very upset because she realized that her coat was stolen, that it was the middle of winter and it was freezing cold. She didn't know what was going to happen, how she was going to get it back, and she was just very upset that somebody would steal her coat. So fortunately, we had dorm insurance, and all she had to do was file a police report, and within days, she was sent a coat that was exactly the same one that she had, because we had this insurance, and the insurance paid for itself in that very moment. So different insurance covers different things. There's some that cover theft and damage if you drop your computer or phone or whatever it might be. So you want to, when you look into these policies, look at what the coverage might be, but just something to put on your list to take a look at and see if it makes sense for you and your family. And then the other thing we wanted to bring to you this evening is something that we feel is important and a lot of people don't know about. And this is something that is at your fingertips literally, and at your children's fingertips literally. So on your iPhone, if you have an iPhone, you'll see this medical ID app. It's a white square with a red heart in it. If you have a different kind of smartphone, you can get a similar health app downloaded onto it. And the medical ID app is a way for first responders to bypass a lock screen, whether it's facial recognition or numerical code, and get into whatever information you've put into that app. So it is especially important if your child has some kind of allergy, whether it be a food allergy or an allergy to a certain medication. It's important if your child has any kind of medical condition that a first responder would need to know about. They're trained to look for this. They're trained to look into it. So this is not only for your adult child, but anybody in your family. If you feel like this would be a useful tool for you, just something to look into and decide if it would be something that would be useful for your family and for your young adults that are going off to college. And then lastly, people always ask us about safety apps. And there are a plethora of safety apps. I mean, if you go and you Google safety apps, you're going to get an enormous amount to look into. We don't endorse any of them, but we do recommend that a good way of finding out which ones might be most effective for your family is to talk to other family members that you trust, or trust in other families that you know of. If your student has friends that use these safety apps, maybe they have some ideas to pass on. Some common ones that are used are Find My Friends, Follow My Uber, Follow My Walk. Those are some that are more popular. Again, you do not want to download any of the safety apps without vetting them first. So that's important that you do that and then decide what might be best for you and for your family.
So the other thing that people bring up, and of course this kind of came on heavily when we were all dealing with the COVID pandemic, was, can these documents be prepared remotely? And yes, we do this work with clients over Zoom. So if that is something that is more convenient, that's certainly something that we could do. We have our offices right here in Lincolnshire, so not too far away from where most of you are probably situated. So we're very happy to see people in the office. And we always, that's our more preferable way, but certainly planning remotely is an option. We've got everything automated. So when you're ready to go, we send out links to portals so your adult child can log in And if it's agreeable to them, you could also log in and take a look and see what the questions are that we're asking, so we can put the documents together. We do offer this, again, this is not meant to be a commercial, but people always ask, do you do this and how much does it cost? We do charge $300 for the program, and we prepare all 4 documents. So the healthcare power of attorney, the HIPAA authorization, the power of attorney for property, and the FERPA form. So we have an online portal. We send out links. The questions get answered. We prepare the documents, and then either over Zoom or in our office, we spend about 35-40 minutes going over everything with your adult child and answering all of their questions, and then having them sign everything. And then we make sure that they're notarized and witnessed properly. So we take care of all of that. So it's a really, it's a good program. You can do this yourself. There's resources available online, but we like to offer this at a very low cost. So it's more open to people to want to use a lawyer in order to get these documents done correctly, and then also benefit from the added value that we're putting in of the explanations, and also beefing up the documents to make them a little bit more relevant and useful. So the important thing, though, to point out, though, is that you can't do this when it's too late, right? So you want to have the documents in place. Again, you hope you never have to use them. But if they're in place and ready to go, it's really a great benefit. Once they're too late to create, they're too late to create. So if a child becomes incapacitated, they're not going to be able to execute or sign the documents at that time. So you want to consider putting these into place when your adult child turns 18, to ensure that you and your family and your adult children in particular are protected with the proper powers of attorney and the healthcare directives. It's very important to pre-plan. It's always less expensive, less stressful than trying to deal with a crisis, right? So once something bad happens, you're going to be behind the 8 ball at that point in time. And this is just going to become much more difficult to complete, if you can complete it at all. And it's certainly going to be more expensive and stressful.
So some of the most important gifts that you can give to your adult children once they turn 18 is to protect them with that power of attorney for healthcare. So if they cannot make their own medical decisions, that power of attorney for healthcare is going to authorize the people who can step in and make those decisions for the adult child. That HIPAA authorization, who's authorized to call up that hospital that your child is in and get information about what is happening with them. The power of attorney for property, designating those who could help out with financial affairs. The FERPA authorization to get access to educational records, a will or a trust if it's advisable, to check into that insurance if it makes sense for you. Same thing with using the medical ID and the safety apps as well. So however you get these documents done, the important part is that they are done, as Alan said, ahead of time. They can't be signed again until your child turns 18, but once they're 18, they should have these documents put into place.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. Let's just make sure we got everything. So how much does it cost to make a will? That's a hard question to answer, because it could be different types of things depending on what else you're doing and what your situation is. We do offer a free consultation, of course, so you could always email us. We'll send you some information about us with price ranges, and then we'll also give you a link to make an appointment for a free 1-hour consultation. There's no obligation to that. So and then let's see what else we have here. Yeah, so we do have some competitors out there, Mama Bear. We are aware of people that use that, and I think that it's fine. The one thing that it really kind of doesn't do that we do is sitting down with the adult child and explaining everything, and then also customizing the documents to make sure that they're going to provide all of the additional powers that we feel are important and are left out in the statutory form. So that certainly is an option. Again, Mama Bear is an option, but one that we feel we do a better job, just because it's more of a personal touch.
And there was a question about getting the notary.
Yes, so the forms do have witnessing requirements and notary requirements. They're different for each form. So, I mean, that's why, again, another good reason to use a lawyer if you can, to help you navigate that part of it. It's a little bit difficult, but you'll know what you need to do, because if you download the forms from Google, you know, hopefully they'll have spots for witnesses and notaries, so you can do that correctly.
Yeah, make sure you do get them witnessed and notarized.
Please can.
Yes, the adult child is the one who, these are the adult child's forms.
Yeah, they're our client, by the way, not you, the parent. You get to pay for it, of course,
Yes.
but you are not the client. They are.
They're the one, these are their forms. They choose who they're going to authorize to step in and act on their behalf. So that is what the hospital is going to listen to. That's what the bank, for example, is going to listen to. They're going to go by the actual form and whoever they've designated.
Right, but I will say that, I mean, I guess in theory, somebody could go to court and claim that an adult child is incompetent and try to obtain a guardianship. That would supersede the forms, but that would be going pretty far. And of course, the adult child has rights to, of course, claim that they're not incapacitated and don't need to have a legal guardian. So that would be a fairly extreme example, but there is a possibility that somebody could start something like that up. Sherry, thanks so much for your compliment. We appreciate it. So we really appreciate having the opportunity to discuss this with you today.
And thank you for taking the time this evening and allowing us to bring this information to you. It's super important. And the goal for us is just to make sure that all of your children are protected with these forms.
Caren and Alan, would it be okay for me to send not only a copy of this recording to our junior and senior families, but would it be possible to get your slide deck also?
We'll send over a PDF so you can forward that over to anyone that's interested.
Perfect. Great.
Yes, we expect everyone to watch this over and over again. It's going to be, maybe it'll go viral. Yeah, so thank you so much.
I have, I think, 30 YouTube subscribers, so you'll be set. Thank you everyone for your patience, waiting through us, especially to our presenters. They were so flexible and gracious when we were kind of in our panicked moment. I hope everyone has a great evening, and Caren and Alan, thank you again so much.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. Have a good night,
everybody.
Have a great night,
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so much.